This is the Carolina Catholic Homeschool Showcase. Now, here's your host, Elizabeth Hadi.
Welcome to the Carolina Catholic Homeschool Showcase, brought to you by Carolina Catholic Media Network. I'm your host, Elizabeth Hadi. This whole week, we've been exploring homeschooling in a classical way, and today I'm delighted to have the opportunity to chat with Kathleen Lewis about the role of memory in a classical education. Kathleen Lewis lives her vocation as a wife and mother in the Diocese of Charlotte and has been blessed to do so for 30 years. She has served parishes as a director of religious education and youth minister before beginning to homeschool her children 20 years ago. As a creator of the Catholic Classical Enrichment Program, Kathleen has had the joy of accompanying other homeschooling families around the Charlotte area for 10 years. Along with homeschooling, she co-hosts a radio show called Joyful Echo here on the Carolina Catholic Media Network and regularly teaches and gives presentations on various topics, including the temperaments. Welcome, Kathleen. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Elizabeth. It's my pleasure. I'm glad we could finally get together.
Yes, I know, right? A lot of back and forth just to make it work. Now, Kathleen, you have been involved in the homeschooling community here in Charlotte for many years. And you developed this memory work program called Catholic Classical Enrichment, otherwise known as CCE, which is used at St. Anne Parish. Now, I know there's lots of other classical programs that also use this core component called memory work. The program I use, Aquinas Learning, does. Classical Conversations is another, I think, pretty well-known Christian classical program. So could you explain how these memory work programs work? And then maybe talk about why they are valued so much in classical education?
Sure. So CCE really started, like I said in the bio, about 10 years ago. And it started because there was a group of moms, I wasn't the only one, looking at classical education. Many of us had used Designing Your Own Classical Curriculum, that book, early in our homeschooling, and we wanted something a little more. And we wanted something that was organized and structured, a classroom setting where our children could get together. We knew of at least one other program, Classical Conversations, that was out there, but it was missing that component of the Catholic faith that we didn't feel was just an add-on or a supplement. We really felt that had to be driving the car, so to speak. We wanted our children to be immersed in the faith. That was how we lived. That was how we homeschooled. So having a classical program that wasn't also immersed in the faith, it just wasn't going to work for us, for our families. And so we looked around to see what was out there. And at the time, there wasn't anything that fit our needs. So we started CCE. And over time, very quickly, actually, we went from a few moms down to 2 moms. And my partner, Michelle Cannon, and I really shepherded the program from that first cycle, because we go through, in our program, 3 cycles. So we went from that first cycle to creating a second cycle and then a third cycle together and walking our children through that process. These were my younger children. So my older children had an education that was classical in the sense, well, I guess I should say it was classically inspired. I know there are some purists out there, and my hat is off to you for everything that you know about classical education in its purest form. That's just not who I am. So in full disclosure, I probably should say my oldest were educated in a classically inspired way.
Well, and there are so many different ways to even understand or define classical education. Yes. There's kind of different camps with it. So
yes, and people get very heated about
yes, very passionate.
whether a program is neoclassical or purely classical or classically inspired. So I try and make sure that people understand what I mean when I'm talking about a program or an education being classical. So CCE really is Catholic first. And Michelle and I did a lot of praying about whether the Lord might already have something out there in existence so that we could sort of put down this mantle that we felt for creating this program. Maybe there's something out there that we can just jump on board and use that instead. And with the creation of each new cycle, we would go through that investigation time period, and prayerfully it just never materialized that there was something else out there that fit our needs. But in terms of the memory work component to CCE, I can see the difference between the education that my older children had, which was wonderful and fine, but that education and the education that my younger ones had through CCE, really utilizing memory work to build that foundation in a solid way, in a way that oftentimes at the beginning, they didn't understand what this meant, this thing that they memorized, but over time it unfolded. And I've even had my oldest, who's getting ready to turn 30 now, if you can believe it, say that in graduate courses, she's been sitting with an exam that asked a question, and her mind instinctively went back to some of the memory songs that she worked with her younger sisters to memorize. And there was that information.
That's amazing.
she would email me and say, like, thank you, Mom. Thank you for the St. Benedict song or whatever. Because it's in there. It's just about retrieving it, when it's appropriate. So that's a really long answer for a short question, but I hope that it gets to what you were hoping to find.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I'm also wondering, so these programs, these classical programs that use memory work, I mean, I'm just interested too in exploring, contrasting that with a lot of modern education. And certainly memory and memorizing is part of modern education as well, but they don't structure it the same way. I don't think I've seen, just in a sort of a non-classical school where they use this, they have these specific classes that are called memory work. And so I'm wondering what you think the differences are between the way modern education views memory and how you view it from a classical perspective.
Sure. I'll give you, a lay person's understanding.
Okay.
I think that memorizing facts, and that might be a better way to even discuss it. Memorizing facts goes in and out of favor in education. So there are times that we'll go through seasons in education when memorizing facts is understood as an important part of education, whether it's memorizing your times tables or memorizing a list of prepositions or those kinds of things. And then there are seasons when it is very much out of fashion, so to speak, to focus on memorizing things. The fashion seems to be that we want students to understand things more deeply. We don't simply want them to memorize facts. And that's usually the way it's worded when we're in that kind of season. And I think that's probably the season that we're in now. But the fact of the matter is, and seems to be, and I think if you have children, if you raise children past, even the youngest elementary years, yourself that the human brain is made to take in that information. We memorize all kinds of things. If you start singing a song, a popular song from when you were in high school, regardless of your age, you'll find that those words are in there. Even if someone came up and asked you, do you know all the lyrics to, insert song here? You might say, oh, I don't know. But as soon as it came on, you probably would be surprised to find that you know all the songs, or a TV show that you watched when you were young, or a movie that you really enjoy, and all the dialogue is just there in your brain. So we memorize those things all the time. I remember talking to a parent, this was years and years ago, when I was a DRE, and she was trying to make the case for why her second grader could not be made to memorize the act of contrition in preparation for his first confession. And I said, okay, now this will date the conversation. I said, does he play Pokemon cards? He said, oh yes, he loves Pokemon cards. You ask him, pick a couple cards at random in his, big old stack, and ask him, which Pokemon is this? And what can you tell me about this Pokemon? And dollars to donuts, he can tell you that Pokemon, he can tell you what it started as, what it morphs or evolves or whatever that language is into. He can tell you all of those things. He could probably tell you which one other Pokemon it's related to. So your son does memorize things. It's really about, as a parent who's also educating in a formal way, in a structured way, like homeschooling, it's about making a decision, a conscious decision intentionally. What is it that his little brain or her little brain is going to be memorizing? That's really the thing that you are deciding as a homeschool parent. It's not whether memorizing is happening, whether there's memory work going on. The brain is doing memory work all the time. How do I get from here to the library? What's my friend's phone number? All of those things, that's all memory work.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, I think, we just have to be conscientious about what we are choosing to memorize. And I also love your point about the connection between music and memorization, right? That when you put something to a tune, right? When you have some sort of song with it, it just becomes so much easier to memorize. And so you can have all these songs from your past in your head for years and years. And it's not even like you consciously tried to memorize them.
Right. You may not even want it anymore.
Right. Yes. It's just all about repetition and that tune, right? And so it's a beautiful way. And that's something I found when I started using Aquinas Learning, is that, it's also the history, the catechism, and the science are all set to music. And that first semester we used the program, I was dreaming about these memory work songs. I'd have, the laws of motion in my head, and I would dream about it. I'd wake up with it in my head. And I was like, this is so powerful. It made me realize just what and that's the way God made it, right? God, I think, made music, for many reasons, but I think one of them is that it is such a beautiful way to also remember words and to remember beautiful, profound things and important facts. And that it's so sad today that we use music, I think, in the entirely wrong way, that we're using it instead to fill our heads with trite or disturbing even lyrics. And that those are what are going into kids' heads to a large extent, instead of really interesting, important, or beautiful things.
Right. And for a long time, for human beings, before we had writing and before many people were literate, they were taking things in through other senses, and committing those things to memory is something that was very much linked to the faith. Put these things on your head, put these things onto your arms. They're to become a part of you,
Mm-hmm.
and not solely from the standpoint of remembering what you're reading,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we do, of course, in modern times.
Yeah, and that also makes me think about just the role of epic poetry and sort of the oral storytelling that was often had a rhythm to it, that was almost sung, right? And that was a way that to enjoy it, but also a way probably to help them memorize these incredibly long, challenging works that they were, these amazing feats that they were able to accomplish.
Yes, absolutely. That rhythm, as you said, the musical rhythm is so important. And in our homeschool, we have kind of an interesting situation with my two youngest. So my youngest child, my daughter, loves to memorize things to music. And that is her primary way of memorizing things. So when she knows she has to memorize something for a class, she's in high school, and I don't teach all of her classes anymore. She will Google and look online. Is there a song for this? Can I memorize the Gettysburg Address to a song? And even if I listen to the song and I think, that's not a very compelling tune, I'm not sure that for her, that is what works. And then my next youngest daughter, who's getting ready to graduate high school, is deaf and uses cochlear implants to process sound. And music is one of the remaining challenges of using cochlear implants. Mm-hmm. So for her, she still likes to memorize things to music. She still knows all of the memory songs from CCE, all 3 cycles and all that. But when she sings it back, it does not sound like what it sounds like to those of us with, bionormal hearing. So it's funny for me to just think about, what is it about the song, the rhythm, that makes it go right into your brain, even for someone who's not hearing the same tune mm-hmm. that we're hearing. And I don't know, you'd have to study that way beyond my pay grade, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, that is really fascinating. So that kind of segues into what I would love to talk about next, okay. which is kind of techniques for memorization, right? And the music is definitely one really important technique that helps us memorize. But I also wanted to talk about this idea of a memory palace. But first, we do need to take just a short break.
Sure.
But please stay tuned and we will be back shortly.
"2022 is bringing many new and exciting changes to our Carolina Catholic Apostolate, built to communicate how to better learn, love, and live our Catholic faith. We begin with our name change to Carolina Catholic Media. This reflects the expanded scope of Carolina Catholic Radio to include the development of our podcast, streaming, social media, YouTube, and direct marketing platforms. 2022 is a very important year for the Catholic Church. As a result, Carolina Catholic Media will feature more local news, information, and conversation to reflect what's happening now and how it impacts our local Catholic community. Throughout the year, Carolina Catholic Media will showcase our Catholic schools and homeschools, the Charlotte Diocese 50th anniversary, and the 2-year worldwide synod process that begins on the diocesan level. We encourage you to get involved, join us, and catch the spirit. The Carolina Catholic Media Apostolate is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are 100% funded by you. Please consider a donation, monthly tithe, or business sponsorship to support our mission and vision to spread the truth of Jesus Christ and our Catholic faith across the Carolinas. Thank you for discerning a role in our apostolate. May God bless you abundantly.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Carolina Catholic Homeschool Showcase. I'm your host, Elizabeth Hadi, and I am here with Kathleen Lewis to discuss memory and classical education. So right before the break, I brought up the idea of a memory palace as a technique for memorization. And I learned about this really only in the last year or so, but I know that it's a technique that goes all the way back to the Greeks. And then it was also cultivated in the medieval ages by St. Albert and St. Thomas Aquinas. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually in the middle of reading a book called Memorize the Faith. You have that right there. Yes.
Thank you so much for writing
this. It's amazing. So that has been really fascinating to me. And I'm only about halfway through it. So I still, have some more reading to do. But in it, Kevin Voss talks about the fact that St. Albert and St. Thomas explicitly recommend the development of memory as an element of a virtuous lifestyle, especially when you're talking about the virtue of prudence, which I found fascinating. That prudence, that we need memory, we need our past experiences and what we've learned, the memories from what we've learned, to help us to figure out what we should do, to help us to cultivate the virtue of prudence. So anyway, but one of the main ways that he talks about in this book is this memory palace. And so I'm wondering if you then can describe the memory palace for us and how it works.
Yes. So basically, and again, I am not Kevin Vost. Basically, the memory palace just takes that process that a brain goes through, even for a small child, of understanding your surroundings. So you think about your home. You instinctively, probably at this point, know how to get from your bedroom to the kitchen. You could do it in the dark, in the middle of the night. Maybe you have, if you didn't want to turn on a light and wake up a baby, you could do that instinctively. So you have that space kind of mapped out already in your mind, and you could walk all through your home in your mind. So the memory palace is sort of an expansion of that ability that we already have, that we cultivated when we were children, of knowing our surroundings. And what you do is you take that space, and it can be your home, or it could be another space that you know very well. It can be a fictitious space that you create in your mind, but because you keep coming back to it in your imagination, you begin to know it as well as you know an actual space like your home. But I think Kevin does recommend starting with a space that you do already know. And then in certain locations, you place the elements of the thing that you're trying to memorize. So whether you're trying to memorize the periodic table, or you're trying to memorize, the corporal works of mercy, whatever it might be, you place those things in certain locations in this memory palace. And then there's some little something that will trigger what it is you want to remember. It might be, a sword in a certain place. It might be, I seem to remember that when he was walking through the 10 Commandments, there was a mat on the, at the front door.
When you walk in the door.
That's right. That's right. So, something like that just triggers in your mind, oh, yes, this is, and it doesn't have to rhyme. It can, and sometimes it's even more helpful if it's obscure, if it's weird, because it sticks, which is the point. It doesn't have to be clever. It doesn't have to be something that would be meaningful to anyone else but you. And by doing that, then in your mind, you walk yourself through that space, looking at all those items in your mind, and it will call to mind all the elements that you're trying to memorize. It's fascinating, I think.
It is. And so are you supposed to, is there still supposed to be an association between those objects or things in the room and what you're trying to memorize?
There is an association, but it doesn't have to be obvious. Like I said, it really can be something that triggers the connection for you. It doesn't have to be something that's, like for, I'm trying to think of a good example. If you're trying to remember that, give drink to the thirsty is one of the corporal works of mercy, to stick with that one. It doesn't have to be, when I get to the kitchen, the refrigerator, I'm going to see a big pitcher of water. That would be a very obvious thing. It doesn't have to be that obvious. It doesn't have to be a person who looks thirsty that you find there. It might be, for when I was growing up, the Kool-Aid man was, very popular in advertising, and he was huge. He was this big pitcher of Kool-Aid or whatever. And so it might be that you walk into the kitchen and the Kool-Aid man is there.
Right. That would be memorable.
Yes. It would just be something that's like, oh, the thirsty. Okay. Give drink to the thirsty, or
so it
might even,
it just needs to have, you need to have an association with it. Even
That's right.
If other people don't.
That's right. Exactly. Because you're the only one in there, ideally.
Right. Now, have you used this technique?
So I have used it more with my children when they've had to memorize things. I'm getting ready to have a change of life. So my youngest is getting ready to finish her sophomore year of high school and go into her junior year.
Okay.
And so I'm at the threshold, so to speak, of a new stage in life. And I really don't know what the Lord is going to call me to in that stage where I'm not actively homeschooling anymore. But it very possibly could involve further education. So I'm very aware that I need to make sure that these skills are developed in my own mind, so that I'm not simply focused on the things that my children have needed to memorize, many of which I had memorized already, but other things I had not. But to take it from those things and make sure that I can apply it to other things that I may be studying that doesn't have anything to do with what they learned.
Yes. Well, and I have found that I'm amazed at how quickly my children can memorize things and how much harder it is for me, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, you know, as an adult, you have that ability to apply yourself diligently and learn something. But we also are so busy. And I do think we don't soak it in quite the same way. I don't know if there's just so many other things going on in our heads, or if our memory really does, you know, start degrading, or what it is exactly. But I have been just so amazed at my children and what they've been able to memorize. But I feel like it takes me a bit more work to get there.
Yes, it does. It does. And I know in my own life, I see a difference where I am today versus where I was 10 years ago when we started the program, that it's almost ironic now to think, you know, at a time when I will walk around the house with my reading glasses on my head, looking for my reading glasses, that I'm being interviewed to talk about memory work. Like, I think that's hysterical.
Right. Well, do you have any other tips then for trying to keep your memory sharp? I mean, we have this memory palace, we have setting things to music. Do you have anything else you'd recommend?
I really do think that you said it as repetition, but having some consistency, coming back to certain information regularly, it doesn't have to be for a long period of time, and associating it as often as possible, and it's not always possible, but associating it with a positive emotion, to be honest. You know, I would tell the parents with CCE, be consistent and be cheerful. If your children always associate the time when you sit down for memory work with, you know, okay, look, come on, we have to do this. You know, if it has that sort of mood to it, really, you know, yeah. It's going to stick. Would it stick for you? You know,
it's just drudgery then.
That way. That's right. That's right. So as much as possible to take a moment, to take a big deep breath, say a quick prayer to the Holy Spirit, and put a smile on your face. Even if you're not feeling the smile, put a smile on your face, and then go to that thing that you want to memorize. And just a few moments, but a few moments consistently over time, you'd be surprised. It does so much more than a long cram session that's very stress filled.
Yeah. Well, and I think that also, I think that goes along with this idea of the music component, that can just make it more joyful when you have this cheerful tune or fun tune that you're singing to. And, you know, I think that just makes it a more enjoyable experience for everyone. I mean, I like it better doing it that way as well. So I think that can help. But when you talked about consistency, I think that is so important. And I've noticed this year we've been more consistent with a morning time routine. In addition, and that's kind of separate than the memory work we do, which we do at lunchtime. But in the morning, I do have, you know, we read certain things, you know, Saint of the Day, and a book on the spiritual life that we read. It's just a couple pages every day together in the morning. My kids are 14, 12, 10, and 8. And then I have a almost 2-year-old. But so the four boys that are all between 8 and 14, they can all kind of listen in to the books and read them together. But then we also are doing poetry during that time. That's, you know, obviously a common thing to do during that morning time. And so we're working on memorizing poems, and it's been fascinating to see how even when I don't even give them a copy to look at, if I'm just reading it aloud to them, and I'm just doing that every day, and it's not stressful. It's not like I'm forcing them to memorize it. I just read it to them every day. And then before long, they start kind of saying it along with me, and starting to enjoy kind of the challenge of seeing how much of it they can remember. And it's just because we're just doing it every day. And it's just, It only takes a couple minutes, but that's been beautiful beautiful to see. And that also brings me to another question that I wanted to ask you, which has to do with memorizing not just these kind of key facts, right, that we've been talking about all along with the memory work, but also how important it is to memorize beautiful things, to memorize poetry and literature and speeches, and of course the Bible. And so I'm wondering, do you think that you should approach these the same way that you approach memory work, just kind of the consistency and repetition, or is there anything different about memorizing those types of things?
Well, I do think that consistency is always a good path when you're talking about memory work, for sure, and really education in general, as much as possible. And life is crazy. Homeschool life is very busy. It's not lived, as any homeschooler knows, it's not lived all in your home. It's a very active life, especially in these times when it's so much more understood and accepted in our society. So it's a busy life, and being consistent is an important component to effective homeschooling, but understanding the flexibility of life. So I would say that when you're talking about facts, it can be quick. It can be a quick presentation of material. Like you said, it could be in the morning. We have our memory work for CCE recorded on audio. It's available through TAN Academy now. I would encourage, way back when we actually burned CDs for people, and there weren't MP3 files floating around, I would encourage moms, get that CD and put it in the van, put it in the car, so that the first 2 minutes or the first 5 minutes of any drive that you took during the day for errands or what have you, it was the memory work for that week, or it was memory work from before. So that kind of consistency, where mom doesn't even have to be sitting down, no one's looking at the printed word necessarily, it's just coming through audio and it's done with regularity, can be helpful. Now, when you're talking about a longer piece, like a poem, I do find that while repetition is still important, and consistency is so important, it's going to be a longer haul.
Mm-hmm.
I think for a very young child, I'm always amazed at a young child who doesn't have a particular recitation to work on, just being around, just playing with blocks in the same room, where an older brother or an older sister is memorizing a long poem for a recitation. I found certainly later in the day, I would walk by and hear this child start to 77 years ago, just
Right.
He doesn't know what that means. She has no idea, Abraham Lincoln, Civil War. No, there's none of that going on. But it's just soaked in because it's been heard over time. So I think committing a longer period of time for a consistent, on a consistent basis is going to be important for a longer work. But it's the same process. It's just longer and deeper, which is the case for a lot of the things about educating older children. You're doing the same things, you're just doing it more deeply, and you're doing it over a longer period of time.
Yes, which is why kind of the cyclical way that it can work in classical education, why that works so well, right? To have, and the same thing with Aquinas learning, right? You have these 3 cycles. And so each time you're able to look at that material again, remember what you learned last time, and then dig deeper into it.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, our faith, our liturgical seasons are cyclical for a reason. We don't go through Lent one time in our lifetime. It comes up every year, and you can be amazed at an insight that you can have based on a reading that you hear at Mass. And I know I have asked this question myself. Was that always in the Bible? Was that, no, obviously I know, but was that always there? Because that's so profound, and I never thought about it before, considered the depth of this. It comes back around because we need it to. The Lord has ordered these things because he made us. He knows how we work. So we need that. We need it to come through at different times, because at different times you'll have the ears to hear part of that message that you didn't have last year or 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Yes, that is so beautiful. And I think that's one of the things that I love about homeschooling is that I can keep coming back to these materials over and over again. And I think about my oldest is 14, youngest almost 2, and like all the years of homeschooling that I have left. And part of me is like, wow, that's a lot of more years that I have ahead of me. But on the other hand, I'm like, well, maybe actually by the time my youngest, has graduated and I'm done homeschooling, maybe these things I'll really have learned a lot. Maybe if I keep coming back and encountering it again and again, maybe I'll really remember it and, we'll be in a much better place in terms of my knowledge. But it does really take going back over and over again. And I've seen that with my students too, how many times you need to repeat something for it to really stick, and just how important that is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we are just about out of time here, but I wanted to thank you. I know, right? It's been already more than half an hour, I think. But it's been such a delight talking to you about this.
Thank you. Thank you. It has been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure. We've known each other, but never had a singular conversation like this for this long. That's wonderful.
Right. So it's such a treat. And I wanted to close with a quote by Stratford Caldecott. Have you read Beauty in the Word?
Yes.
So it's a lovely book. I think I probably need to read it many more times.
I go back to it regularly.
It's very, very deep, very philosophical. But in it, he talks a lot about memory, right, and the role of memory and relating it to grammar and the trivium, and just has so many beautiful things to say about it. But there's one quote in particular that I was reading recently that really struck me, and I think it just can provide inspiration for all of us as we continue to value the role of memory in our education and in our children's education as we're homeschooling. For us, therefore, the training of memory is essential if we are to discover and enlarge our human identity in the image of God. It is an essential foundation for any education worthy of the name.
That is beautiful. I mean, there's a reason we keep going back to his work.
Right? Yes. All right. Well, thank you once again. And thank you all of our listeners for joining us today on the Carolina Catholic Homeschool Showcase. It was such a wonderful and fruitful conversation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Bye, everyone.
Right. Bye-bye.
2022 is bringing many new and exciting changes to our Carolina Catholic Apostolate, built to communicate how to better learn, love, and live our Catholic faith. We begin with our name change to Carolina Catholic Media. This reflects the expanded scope of Carolina Catholic Radio to include the development of our podcast, streaming, social media, YouTube, and direct marketing platforms. 2022 is a very important year for the Catholic Church. As a result, Carolina Catholic Media will feature more local news, information, and conversation to reflect what's happening now and how it impacts our local Catholic community. Throughout the year, Carolina Catholic Media will showcase our Catholic schools and homeschools, the Charlotte Diocese 50th anniversary, and the 2-year worldwide synod process that begins on the diocesan level. We encourage you to get involved, join us, and catch the spirit. The Carolina Catholic Media Apostolate is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are 100% funded by you. Please consider a donation, monthly tithe, or business sponsorship to support our mission and vision to spread the truth of Jesus Christ and our Catholic faith across the Carolinas. Thank you for discerning a role in our apostolate.